This is a review of the Kinera BD005 Pro. This is a dual driver hybrid in-ear monitor. It's got one 9.2mm beryllium diaphragm dynamic driver, and it has one balanced armature driver. What's cracking, audio fans? It's David here from Prime Audio Reviews. So I'm here with the Kinera BD005 Pro. Now, believe it or not, this little guy comes in at just $49. Yes, this is a sub $50 IEM. Hard to believe when you actually see it. Harder to believe when you find out how it performs. So there's the box. You get some specs on the back. There's a little frequency response graph there as well. I'll throw up mine in the video later. Inside the box, what you do get a fairly nice little zipper carrying case. It's a good size. I quite like this size. It's pocketable, but it's still big enough to comfortably fit the earphones without sort of really winding up the cable too tight. But now let's have a look at the earphones. And man, check these out. $49. These look like a prestige, at least $100 or up earphone. The shell design is absolutely gorgeous. These come in three colors. There's a blue and a gray and a red. So you got the Kinera logo in gold print there, surrounded by gold flakes in the faceplate. Acrylic shells, this sort of opaque shell that you can kind of see through. You can't really see the driver configuration in there, but it's a pseudo custom shell design. Very, very comfortable, very lightweight. The build quality is fantastic. You can see there's a single vent just there, and it's got protective mesh. It's got a nice lip on it so your ear tips stay in place securely. These are, of course, as usual, third-party tips because the included ones are really small, but that's besides the point. So those are the earphones. In terms of comfort, these are really, really good. These are sort of all day long wear kind of earphones for me. No pain or discomfort in the least. So really happy with the design visually and physically. I think they've done a great job, especially when you consider the price. And I'll probably keep coming back to that price throughout this video. But for now, let's quickly have a look at the cable. So here's the cable. It's a fairly generic type of cable, but it's a good type of generic. It is a 4-core braided. It's got this black insulation, metal or aluminium 2-pin connector housings. For some reason I ended up with the microphone version. I usually go for the non-mic'd cable versions because the microphones in some occasion tend to cause some channel imbalance, a slight channel imbalance, like 3 to 5 dB, but I haven't noticed that with this particular cable. So it's pretty nice. So the microphone is metal, the connectors are the Y-split, and of course the right-angled 3.5mm termination is matching aluminium as well. So overall, it is a very nice cable. For a $50 earphone, you couldn't ask for much more than that, really. It handles nicely, no major microphonics or anything. Nice handling cable and quite attractive. Right, so let's get back to the earphones now and talk about how they sound. Remember, this is a $49 earphone, and the basic sound signature or presentation of the BD005 Pro, it has a light V-shaped signature, fairly balanced though. I wouldn't call the mids recessed, but a sort of a typical V-shaped signature where your bass and treble is a little bit lifted in relation to the mid-range. And overall the sound it's very clean. It is a somewhat bassy earphone. It's definitely not a bass head earphone, but it does have elevated bass. Although it is lifted slightly, the treble is still fairly safe in terms of tuning. If you're treble sensitive, I don't think you'll have any problems with these. I haven't noticed any stridency whatsoever, and I've been using these for several days, actually about a week non-stop. I've been using these exclusively. and I haven't come across any harshness or stridency. So yeah, very good. Let's break it down now, starting with the bass, of course, and these have a pretty chunky bass, pretty meaty bass on them. They're fairly linear between the sub bass and the mid bass, so you get a healthy boost in both of those areas. It's not the fastest bass out there. It does have kind of a slightly blunted edge for that thickness and impact, and it has a slightly slower decay as well. So you get that big sort of rounded bass body, but the control is very good. Remember, this is a beryllium, or at least beryllium coated dynamic driver, so it does have good speed properties, but the tuning itself is a little bit on the slower side for that fuller response. And in terms of quantity, yeah, the bass is elevated, but it's not, like I said, it's not a bass head IEM. It is just a healthily lifted to give you that driving force behind it. I find it works pretty well across multiple genres, all genres pretty much. There's enough oomph there in the bass for your hip hop and your EDM and such. Yet at the same time, if you play some rock music where there isn't so much sub bass but more mid bass essentially, then the driver has no problems keeping up with most music. Like if you're into really intense death metal or something like that, you might want to look for something with a slightly lighter and faster bass response. But for everything else, yeah, I quite like the bass on these. It's not the tidiest, but at the same time, it doesn't really do anything wrong. It doesn't bleed excessively into the mid-range or anything. So yeah, it's a good start for the bass. Moving on to the mid-range now. And the BD005 Pro's mid-range, they've got really nice clarity, slightly recessed in relation to the bass and the treble, but not really what you would call recessed. Like the vocals and instrumentation doesn't sound distant, just slightly pushed back a little bit relatively, but still forward enough. A nice dense center image. Vocals have got good density and body to them. Male and female vocals are represented fairly well. I think probably female vocals get a little bit more of a lift than males. Males are leaning more towards that upper bass region, so there is a bit of coloration from the elevated bass there, but still articulate and clear and pretty engaging overall. The mid-range resolution on these is surprisingly good, as is the detail retrieval, which surprised me considering the amount of bass or the warmth of the sound. But actually the resolution and detail are quite good. You can hear little details and nuances that you might miss in lesser quality earphones, but they're all here, clear and present. And overall, the mid-range is done really nicely. So that leaves us finally with the treble. And like I mentioned earlier, the treble is fairly safe in its tuning, although it doesn't really sparkle that much, but it's not a dull treble either. And the reason there's not really too much sparkle going on is because of the upper treble fall off. Yeah, so basically the upper treble falls off fairly steadily, so you don't get a lot of really high-end airiness and openness, but there's definitely enough in the lower treble for some precision and plenty of detail retrieval, like I mentioned. And despite that upper treble being a little bit subdued, the soundstage on these is still pretty good. It's still a fairly large stage, very nice width, pretty good amount of depth with a little bit of layering but there, and positional cues and imaging throughout the soundstage is pretty good on this. So on a technical level, it actually performs fairly well, but tonality wise, it's just a very pleasant, very enjoyable sound. It's kind of easy going, but it's not dull. It's exciting enough to keep you engaged. And yeah, I think they've done a great job pretty much with the tuning. Nothing to complain about. So let's do some real quick comparisons now. And here is the Tin Hi-Fi T2 Plus. Obviously the T2 Plus here has metal shells, so that might be something you're into. Or on the other hand, you might prefer the aesthetic beauty of the Kinera here. But yeah, these are basically the same price. The T2 Plus has just a single 10mm dynamic driver, whereas the BD005 Pro is a dual driver hybrid. Actually, I might throw up the comparison graph here, and you'll see that the frequency response of these two earphones is actually very close. And not only does it look close on the graph, but it actually sounds, they actually sound very similar as well. The Kinera has slightly more body and fullness in the bass. It's a little bit more forward in the bass. The T2 Plus, I would say the bass is just a tad faster. And because it is not elevated as much, that brings the mid-range a little bit more forward on these. In addition to that, the T2 Plus is more tame in the lower treble region. It's more even without sort of any peaks going on. And that makes it even more safe in terms of sibilance and harshness than the Kinera. But at the same time, it might, for some people, lack a little bit of bite, and those electric guitar solos might not be as electric and invigorating as they are on the Kinera, but it's a very safe tuning indeed. Although, having said that, like I did say, the tuning is similar on both these IEMs. And when it comes to the upper treble, that's when the T2 Plus here gets a little bit of additional lift compared to the Kinera. So the T2 Plus has a little bit of extra airiness up top, but it doesn't have the same sort of precision and definition in the lower treble that the Kinera does. So yeah, they're very similar. They're both really good. If I had to choose between the two, that would be a really tough decision. I'm just lucky to have both. So let's move on to the Moondrop SSP. Now this little guy is, you know, just a ridiculously good value for money earphone. It's only $39 if I remember correctly. So it's $10 cheaper than the Kinera here. The Moondrop SSP does require a more powerful source than the Kinera. The BD005 Pro will basically run from any source without any problem. The SSP here, yeah, it does need a bit of a more powerful and meaty source to deliver its optimal sound. When it comes to the sound, yeah, the SSP has a little bit less bass again than the Kinera, particularly in the sub bass where it falls off a little bit. And in the mid-range, there's a lot of similarities between them both. There isn't a lot of difference, although it's in the upper mid-range where most of the difference happens, and that's because the Moondrop SSP has an upper mid-range emphasis. So it brings vocals more forward, particularly female vocals. They're more vibrant and lively in that presence range, which can be a little bit fatiguing for some people. But the downside of that is that they sort of, to keep things in check, the tonality in check, they kind of had to tone down the treble a little bit. So there's less lower treble emphasis on the SSP. So you've got that upper mid-range brightness, which is different from a true treble brightness, because that 3 and 4 kilohertz range, where human ears are very sensitive to that area, because that's sort of around the voice region, the region of the human voice, I mean. And I'm just rambling now, so I have to apologize. Let me get back on track. So the SSP has got a more subdued lower treble in general, more focus on those upper mid-range, whereas the Kinera takes the more conventional or traditional approach of more of a V-shaped, with more attention paid to the treble and slightly less in the mid-range, which gives it that sort of that clarity. Another downside of that upper mid-range tuning is that the SSP soundstage is a little bit more intimate. It's a bit more not cramped essentially, but the dimensions are smaller, and it just gives the impression of a smaller space than the lighter, more open sound of the Kinera here. And I'm just rambling, so let me wrap this up real quick. I really like the Kinera BD005 Pro. I think, first of all, the price, $49, is amazing. That is fantastic. Obviously, the design, it won't appeal to everybody, but I think it is quite stunning and I love it. Very, very comfortable earphone. The tuning is safe. There's nothing exceptional about the sound, but at the same time, it doesn't really do anything wrong. So I definitely have to give my recommendation for the BD005 Pro. Check it out. It's similar to the T2 Plus here. If you already have the T2 Plus, by the way, I wouldn't recommend getting these as well. They're kind of close enough to, it wouldn't be worth your while. So that about wraps it up for this video. Check the description down below. There's a link to the full written review, and there's a link to my social media channels and my Discord. And if you got any value from this video, give it a thumbs up, Parfam audiophile style. And if you're new to the channel and want to see more reviews like this in the future, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And until next time, I'll see you later.